After the Civil War, the American West didn't calm down. It reorganized. Across multiple states and territories, gangs of outlaws robbed banks, plundered trains, fought lawmen in the streets, and turned entire towns into battlegrounds. They left behind a wake of destruction, and in some cases, public support. These were the gangs that defined outlaw violence in the Old West. The Rufus Buck Gang. In the summer of 1895, 5 young men in Indian Territory, Oklahoma, formed a short-lived but terrifying group of outlaws. Rufus Buck, a member of the Creek Nation, was the leader of the group. With him were Sam Sampson, Lewis Davis, Maoma July, and Lucky Davis. Most were teenagers, or barely in their 20s. Beginning on July 30th, the gang committed a series of violent crimes across rural settlements, including the murder of U.S. Deputy Marshal John Garrett, armed robbery, and sexual assault against several women. Unlike larger outlaw crews of the era, they did not target banks or railroad payrolls. The violence was immediate, localized, and escalated quickly. Buck was reportedly driven to commit his crime spree by anger over white people moving into the Indian Territory, but also expressed a desire to gain local notoriety. The gang was finally captured outside Muskogee by a combined force of lawmen and Indian police on August 10, 1895. They were transported to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and tried in the federal court of Judge Isaac Parker. All 5 were convicted, and on July 1, 1896, Rufus Buck and his 4 accomplices were executed by hanging. The Sam Bass Gang. In 1877, Sam Bass emerged as a railroad robber operating in the American West. Born in Indiana and drifting through Mississippi and Texas, Bass eventually partnered with Joel Collins, where they preyed mainly on stagecoaches until they pulled off what would become one of the more profitable train robberies of the era. On September 18, 1877, Bass and Collins were part of a 6-man gang that robbed a Union Pacific train near Big Springs, Nebraska. The take reportedly exceeded $60,000, nearly $2 million today. The robbery drew national attention and intensified the pursuit by railroad detectives and law enforcement. After the robbery, the gang split up. Bass then returned to Texas and formed a new crew. In 1878, they shifted into a rapid string of robberies across North Texas, hitting stagecoaches and trains in the region around Dallas. The money was not always huge, but the frequency and boldness put him in the crosshairs of Pinkerton agents and the Texas Rangers. But what finally ended the gang was betrayal. A member of Bass's gang, Jim Murphy, turned informant, and lawmen set a trap in Round Rock, Texas. On July 19, 1878, a confrontation in town escalated into a deadly gunfight between members of the gang and Texas Rangers. Sam Bass was later found lying in a pasture west of Round Rock, suffering from gunshot wounds. He died the next day, July 21, 1878, on his 27th birthday. Today, Round Rock reenacts the shootout during its annual Frontier Days celebration, and roads in Texas still carry his name. The Doolin-Dalton Gang. By the early 1890s, the Dalton Gang was already nationally known. Led by brothers Bob, Grat, Emmett, and Bill Dalton, the group had carried out a string of train robberies across the Midwest and Oklahoma Territory. In October 1892, the Daltons attempted something far more ambitious, robbing 2 banks at the same time in Coffeyville, Kansas. The townspeople armed themselves and fought back. Bob and Grat Dalton were killed. Emmett Dalton, who was shot 23 times, survived and was sent to prison. The original Dalton gang effectively ended that day, but the Outlaw network did not. Bill Doolin, who had been associated with the group, reorganized with Bill Dalton and other former associates. The new crew became known as the Doolin-Dalton Gang. From 1892 to 1896, the group carried out repeated bank and train robberies across Oklahoma Territory and into Kansas. Their membership shifted, but Doolin remained the central figure. On September 1, 1893, U.S. Marshals attempted to arrest members of the gang in Ingalls, Oklahoma. The confrontation turned into what became known as the Battle of Ingalls, a prolonged gunfight that left multiple people dead and several others wounded before the outlaws escaped. After Ingalls, the federal response grew more focused. Deputy U.S. Marshals Bill Tillman, Heck Thomas, and Chris Madsen, later called the Three Guardsmen, were tasked with dismantling their outlaw operations. Over the next several years, they doggedly hunted down the gang. Bill Dalton was killed in 1894. Bill Doolin was shot and killed by deputies in August 1896, ending their prolonged reign of terror. The Cowboys. By the late 1870s, southeastern Arizona Territory was booming. Silver discoveries near Tombstone brought money, new settlers, and tension. Operating across Cochise County was a loose but organized group known as the Cochise County Cowboys. Core figures included Curly Bill Brocious, Ike Clanton, and Johnny Ringo. Unlike other structured gangs, the Cowboys functioned more as a regional outlaw network. Their activities included cattle rustling, stage robberies, and cross-border crime into Mexico. They were not isolated criminals. Many had political alliances within the county, which complicated law enforcement efforts. Tensions escalated between the Cowboys and a rival faction aligned with law enforcement in Tombstone. Most notably Deputy U.S. Marshal Wyatt Earp and his brothers Virgil and Morgan Earp, along with Doc Holliday. On October 26, 1881, the conflict culminated in the gunfight at the OK Corral. The shootout lasted roughly 30 seconds and left several members of the Cowboys dead. But the feud did not end there. In the months that followed, Morgan Earp was assassinated, while Virgil Earp was maimed and nearly killed. Wyatt Earp organized what became known as the Vendetta Ride, targeting suspected cowboys he held responsible for his brother's death. Earp killed several members of the gang without hesitation, while other members were arrested, fled the territory, or disappeared from prominence. By 1882, the organized power of the Cowboys had fractured. Unlike gangs before or after them, the Cowboys were deeply entangled in territorial politics. Their violence wasn't just about cash, it was about control. The Wild Bunch. By the mid-1890s, outlaw activity in the West had evolved. Smaller, localized gangs were giving way to coordinated crews operating across multiple states. At the center of that shift was Robert Leroy Parker, better known as Butch Cassidy, and his associate Harry Longabaugh, known as the Sundance Kid. Together, they led what became known as the Wild Bunch. Core members rotated over time, but figures like Kid Curry, Will Carver, and Ben Kilpatrick were among the most prominent. The gang operated primarily out of remote hideouts such as Hole in the Wall, Wyoming, using rugged terrain to evade capture. Between 1896 and 1901, the Wild Bunch carried out a series of major train and bank robberies across Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, and New Mexico. Their robberies were planned, disciplined, and often timed to minimize resistance. Unlike some earlier gangs, they relied on speed, coordination, and an efficient escape strategy. But the gang wasn't above pulling a trigger, which resulted in multiple law enforcement and civilian deaths throughout their peak years. Along with local sheriffs and federal authorities, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency was hired to track the gang. By 1901, facing mounting law enforcement pressure, Cassidy and the Sundance Kid fled to South America. Kid Curry died in 1904 following a gunfight in Colorado. Several remaining members were killed in action over the next few years. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were reportedly killed in Bolivia in 1908. Though alternative theories persist that they somehow survived and lived into old age. The Wild Bunch operated for roughly 5 years at peak strength, executing coordinated robberies across state lines and forcing a national response. Their structure, mobility, and scale set them apart from most outlaw crews of the era. The James Younger Gang. In the years following the Civil War, Missouri remained deeply divided. Former Confederate guerrillas did not simply return to civilian life. Some transitioned directly into organized crime. Out of that violence emerged the James Younger Gang, led by brothers Jesse and Frank James alongside Cole, Jim, John, and Bob Younger. Beginning in 1866, The gang carried out a string of bank and train robberies across multiple states. Estimates vary, but the gang is believed to have killed at least 17 men. Those deaths included bankers, cashiers, law enforcement officers, and citizens who resisted. During the failed 1876 robbery of the First National Bank in Northfield, Minnesota, cashier Joseph Lee Haywood was shot and killed after refusing to open the vault. A local citizen, Nicholas Gustafson, was also killed during the exchange of gunfire. 2 gang members died during the escape, and the younger brothers were captured soon after. Despite the violence, Jesse James cultivated public support in parts of the nation. Sympathetic newspapers portrayed the gang as former Confederate fighters resisting Northern financial institutions during Reconstruction. In some communities, they were seen less as criminals and more as heroic figures. A failed 1875 Pinkerton raid on the James family farm killed Jesse's young half-brother and injured his mother, deepening regional sympathy and reinforcing the gang's mythology. Jesse James never faced trial. On April 3, 1882, in St. Joseph, Missouri, he was shot in the back of the head by Robert Ford, a member of his own gang who had made a deal with Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden to claim the state reward. In one day, Ford was indicted, pleaded guilty, and sentenced to death by hanging before being pardoned by the governor 2 hours later. 5 months later, Frank James surrendered. He was tried for train robbery, but was acquitted because Missouri juries, sympathetic to the gang, refused to convict him. In parts of Missouri, they were protected, defended, and even celebrated. The James Younger Gang came to define the archetype of the American outlaw gang.